I'm here today to talk a little bit about energy storage, but I want to also talk more broadly about some of the energy priorities that the governor has articulated through the course of his first term, and energy storage and the prioritization of energy storage certainly is one of those. So, with that, I'm going to frame things kind of big picture, and then I'm going to dive into discussion of distributed generation and energy storage, which I think are two of the main areas of focus in this administration. So, our overarching vision really is for the long-term clean energy future for the state of California. I think that's really sort of best articulated in our 2050 greenhouse gas reduction goals, and that is a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the state of California by 80% by 2050. Anyone who's read the various papers on this subject will know that it's going to take massive effort across the economy, from the electric sector, from the built environment, and from the transportation sector. And so while I talk about distributed generation, energy storage, and electricity generally, I think it's also just very important to always have in the back of your mind the significant progress we're going to have to make, say, in transportation, whether it be the electrification or the deployment of extremely low emission fuels. So again, I think I've articulated our long-term energy vision, but it really does come down to primarily a renewables-based electricity sector and an electrified transportation sector that is leveraging our primarily renewables electricity sector. So, why are we prioritizing this? There's the environmental component that's certainly very, very significant, but there's also an economic component. California over the last 5 to 10 years has seen literally tens of thousands of jobs created in our green economy, many of them construction jobs associated with the build-out of utility-scale renewables and behind-the-meter solar. And these jobs have primarily come in sectors like the building trades that have been hardest hit during the economic downturn. Another piece is savings to consumers. And I think efficiency is where we've seen the most significant savings. Billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars really over the last 20 to 30 years since we've really started our efforts to focus on efficiency. And efficiency, I will say, is also the first resource in the state of California when we think about how we want to prioritize things. But as we've seen the price of renewables come down, renewables increasingly are driving savings. And we're seeing that primarily in some of the newer contracts that are being signed by the investor-owned utilities with solar facilities and wind facilities at prices below that of new conventional generation. So wow. It's very exciting to see the progress that we're making there, we're going to continue to make, and we have to make to achieve our 2050 goals. So I think I've touched upon this. So with this transformation, we're also facing a lot of new challenges. I think a lot of these challenges were articulated by the panelists earlier, but they have to do with integrating intermittent renewables. They have to do with electrifying our transportation sector. They have to do with investing in aging distribution infrastructure. And I think as we look at these challenges, there are any number of solutions, but two of the areas where we think there is great opportunity to solve these problems in a cost-effective manner are in the investment in distributed generation and investments in energy storage. And these are investments in everything from research and development and to deployment and everything in between. So why distributed generation? I think some of the points we've made about why energy storage are also relevant to distributed generation, particularly as they relate to grid resilience. Having generation located close to our loads allows for reduced reliance on central station power plants. When you have things like fires, which we tend to have quite a few of here in the state, that take down transmission line, we have in-load generation that's clean. There's the jobs component. Tens of thousands of jobs have been created through the deployment of rooftop solar. I think right now we have roughly 25,000 people in California who work in the solar space, be it large scale or distributed, and then also consumer benefits. We have over 100,000 Californians who are currently net metering with rooftop solar. Many of them are doing so and saving money. And I know there's a debate about the value of net metering, but I think at least for those customers, the benefit is very clear, and it's an economic benefit and an environmental benefit. So the goals that we've set for ourselves in distributed generation are significant. The governor in 2010, during his campaign, set a plan to deploy 12 gigawatts of distributed generation by 2020. The good news is that we've made tremendous strides towards achieving that goal. And I'm going to touch upon sort of where we are in the deployment of distributed generation in a moment. And part of the effort has been to convene various stakeholders across the state, from the investor-owned utilities to installers to environmental groups to the folks that manage our grid, to understand how do we do this in the most cost-effective manner. And that really started in 2011 when the governor convened his Distributed Generation Summit. And from that, we've really come to an understanding of what are some of the big barriers: permitting issues, interconnection issues, financing issues. And that has really led to some of the focus that this administration has had in supporting distributed generation. So what is distributed generation? This slide sort of speaks for itself, so I'm going to skip it. I think this is one of the points that that is actually quite significant when we start to think about distributed generation. And we haven't actually, fortunately, we have not really had to deal with some of the grid resiliency issues that that folks on the East Coast have had to deal with. But the example I always like to point to is in New York City. New York University had a fairly large cogen unit located at one of its hospitals in Midtown Manhattan. That cogen unit was part of a microgrid that was able to provide power to their hospital and a number of their dorms. So while most of Manhattan had lost power during Hurricane Sandy, they were able to keep the lights on for students and for folks in their hospital. And so it really does demonstrate, through the application of distributed generation and other smart grid technologies, we can start to plan for and mitigate the real problems that are created by natural disasters. So I think this is an important slide to touch upon. So 12 gigawatts seems like a very large aspirational goal. How are we going to get there? Well, if you see here, we're making tremendous progress. We roughly have, through existing programs and authorizations, these are not deployments, but through programs that have already been approved, over 9,000 megawatts of distributed generation authorized and expected to be built in the state of California. And that ranges everywhere from small residential rooftop solar PV to larger 10 and 20 megawatt solar PV and wind deployments in more remote locations. So really the focus is, at this point, not how do we buy more distributed generation, but how do we integrate it? How do we remove barriers to the deployment of distributed generation? And that's really where we're spending. That's where I spend most of my time, and I think that's really where the focus really needs to continue to be. And part of that is keeping programs on track. It's working collaboratively with our utilities as they implement programs like the reverse auction or the California Solar Initiative. Part of it is working with local jurisdictions to improve their permitting processes for rooftop solar. Part of it is working with the independent system operator to better forecast the production of rooftop solar and integrate it into the load forecast to understand how do we allow distributed generation to offset the need to procure new fossil generation or reduce the need to have fossil generation on standby when there is intermittency in the system. And so, I think looking forward, we talk about 12 gigawatts as a goal, but I think 12 gigawatts is a starting point. The consulting firm E3 did a DG potential study in California, and what they found is that we actually could deploy 15 gigawatts of DG without major need to overhaul the distribution system. So really, from my perspective, what that really illustrates is that where we are right now is just scratching the surface in the potential to to support the policies, to decentralize our electric system, to clean up our electric system, and to really enable the transformation that we need to enable to achieve our 2050 goals. So, the next piece really is energy storage. And in my view, energy storage and distributed generation are sort of the two complements to each other that are necessary to achieve the long-term energy transformation. If we have rooftop solar and combined heat and power and other distributed generation technologies co-located with distribution, even transmission level energy storage, those two things are married together to help us move beyond our reliance on fossil fuels. And so that's why energy storage is viewed as being such a priority. Now, specifically, why? What can energy storage do for California? It can do beneficial things on our transmission system. It can help integrate our utility scale renewables. It can help integrate our distributed renewables. It can help to defer distribution system investments. I think some of this has been touched upon earlier. And it can help customers manage their electricity system. I think one of the interesting things we're seeing, and this from a Silicon Valley perspective, are companies like Solar City that are now starting to co-locate energy storage with their rooftop PV. And this is a customer solution. So customers can have both a backup generator if their power does go out in the case of a storm or of an outage, but also so that these customers can start to consider investments in things like electric vehicles and be able to use their solar to charge their electric vehicle even at night. So in terms of some of the specific ways we're looking at energy storage, I'm going to just quickly run through some of the use cases. And I don't know if that was touched upon in the earlier presentation. I was a little late today, so just a little bit. Anyway, distribution deferral, it's the idea that you can deploy modular energy storage to shave peak growth within a distribution system, thereby allowing utilities to defer sort of big, lumpy distribution system investments. Another one is this idea of community energy storage. This is really the focus of deploying energy storage to help to manage distributed rooftop solar. One of the issues that I think certain utilities in California see is our voltage spikes when you have a lot of rooftop solar on the distribution system. By deploying centrally located energy storage devices, you can manage those voltage spikes, and so you can allow the utilities to operate their system more reliably while allowing for increasing penetrations of rooftop solar. Another example of energy storage, and one that I think is going to be of particular importance in California, is the distributed peaker. California is facing some unheralded challenges, particularly in Southern California, with the retirement of 12,000 megawatts of once-through cooling facilities. And we're sort of considering one path that would mean just replacing these old power plants with new power plants. Now, consider a future where we may be able to start to defer some of those replacements with energy storage devices. In Southern California Edison's territory actually, they're starting to contemplate that. And so we currently have a requirement in California that Southern California Edison procure a 50 megawatt energy storage peaker to try to prove the model. We're running out of time here, so I'm just going to run through these. So anyway, I think finally, how do we unleash energy storage's potential? One is removing barriers, and I think Commissioner Peterman touched upon some of the things that the California Public Utilities Commission is doing to remove barriers to energy storage in its energy storage procurement proceeding. But a lot of these barriers exist just in our market structures. So the idea that we procure ancillary services on a day-ahead basis or sort of in real time, but energy storage requires a large capital investment, sort of illustrates the lack of alignment between the investment decisions that are needed to be made for energy storage and the way we procure the services that energy storage can provide. Another barrier is sort of a lack of experience. I think each utility here in California has some limited experience and some limited deployments, But if we're talking about really ramping up the scale of energy storage, we need to find ways to support much larger demonstration of various technologies and various use cases. And so again, that's, I think, an area where the PUC is showing a lot of leadership. And I want to really congratulate Commissioner Peterman on the progress that's been made at the PUC and the leadership that she has shown on this particular issue. And then finally, it's how do we work with the various stakeholder groups? How does FERC, the ISO, the PUC, the Governor's Office, the Governor's Office of other states, how do we better collaborate to create markets that that work for energy storage? And that's really the open question. I think that's where we have to spend a lot more of our time going forward, is how do we transform the market in a more fundamental way to create opportunities for energy storage. So, with that, I'll open it to questions.
Fantastic. Do we have any audience questions?
Hi, Bill Conlon. So you were going to talk a little bit about CHP, and there is an element to that that has storage in its device plans. So state universities have built-in units with cooling, heat, and power. But when you go to developments, I can't speak to this campus or Microsoft, but former Sun campus now Facebook, 16 buildings over there that would have been a natural for CHP, but real estate developers will not put those in. There are 16 unitary air conditioners on them.
What can you do to remove the barriers to real estate developers embracing this kind of approach?
So, I don't know the specific barriers that any given real estate developer will face, but I would imagine that some of the primary barriers are that, in their mind, they don't see the combined heat and power facilities being economic for any number of reasons. Perhaps it's related to the cost of interconnecting the unit. Perhaps it's related to charges that that facility is going to have to pay to build out. So, I think the focus really just is trying to identify what those economic barriers to combined heat and power are, and then working with the various stakeholders to do so. I think the primary example I like to talk about with regards to combined heat and power are sort of non-bypassable charges, like a departing load charge. And really the idea there is that there are certain fixed costs that the utility has made associated with all of its customers. And if a customer invests in combined heat and power and is no longer buying power from the utility, they are no longer contributing to the payment of those fixed costs. And so the utility recovers those costs through non-bypassable charges. So if those non-bypassable charges are so high that they are putting that CHP project out of the money, then people aren't going to make those investments. So it's really thinking through how do we at once ensure that fixed costs are recovered on an equitable basis while also allowing for these projects to move forward on an economic basis.
Any more questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, Nick.